Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are plunging into a feeling that I think most of us know pretty well.
Yeah.
Kind of buzzes beneath our screens, our interactions. FOMO, fear of missing out.
It really does feel ubiquitous, doesn't it? That phrase is everywhere. And yes, social media definitely amplifies it, showing us these constant, often curated glimpses into what everyone else is supposedly doing.
Right.
But, as the sources we looked at make really clear, it's much more than just a buzzword or a trend. It's actually a complex psychological thing with pretty deep roots.
Exactly. And that's our mission for this deep dive, really. We want to take all this material, this research you've provided, and pull out the key insights.
Mm-hmm.
We want to properly understand the psychology driving FOMO.
Mm-hmm.
How does it actually take hold? Why can it be genuinely harmful? And crucially, what are some maybe psychological ways to handle it, to move past it?
Yeah, we'll distill those core ideas, look at what the research actually tells us. The goal is to give you a clearer picture and hopefully some practical ways to navigate this feeling because it is pretty pervasive.
Okay, great. Let's get started then. So, at its heart, psychologically speaking,
Mhm.
what is FOMO?
Well, based on the sources, the definition boils down to this. It's that anxious feeling, maybe uneasy, that you get when you sense others might be having rewarding experiences.
Okay.
And you're not there, you're absent from them. It's that specific worry, often triggered by seeing, posts or updates that you're kind of on the sidelines while something better is happening somewhere else.
So it's not just feeling bored or a bit lonely. It's specifically feeling left out of the good stuff others are doing.
Precisely. That's the core of it. And while, yes, social media is like this giant magnifying glass for those rewarding experiences,
Yeah, it really puts it in your face.
it does, but the sources are quite clear. The feeling itself, FOMO, it isn't created by social media. It actually taps into much deeper psychological principles. Things like our sense of identity, our fundamental need to belong, even how our brains process information and compare ourselves.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's hooking into something that's already kind of wired into us. And this isn't just like a minor irritation, is it?
Yeah.
The material suggests it can have a real impact.
Oh, definitely. The research really highlights that FOMO isn't trivial at all. It can have significant measurable effects on mental well-being, on our relationships, even how we see ourselves, our self-image. So yeah, understanding it matters because the potential consequences, they run pretty deep.
Okay. So if it's rooted in psychology,
Hmm.
how exactly does it? How does it form? What are the key psychological gears turning behind this feeling?
Yeah, so the sources point to several mechanisms, and they're often interconnected. They build on each other. One really foundational idea goes way back, actually, to the beginnings of social psychology, Leon Festinger's social comparison theory. That was, what, the 1950s?
Right. The idea that we just naturally compare ourselves to other people to figure out where we stand.
Exactly. It's an innate drive. We evaluate our own abilities, opinions, status by looking at others. It's, how we navigate the social world. But here's the crucial bit for FOMO. Online, this natural comparison process it gets warped.
Warped how?
We're constantly exposed to these highly curated, often really idealized versions of other people's lives, right? Their highlight reels. This fuels what psychologists call upward comparisons.
Meaning we compare ourselves to people we think are doing better or are happier or more successful.
Precisely. Like seeing that perfect vacation photo while you're, I don't know, stuck in traffic or dealing with chores. That's the upward comparison hitting you.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
And those comparisons, because they're often based on this incomplete, maybe unrealistic picture, they trigger feelings like inadequacy, jealousy, self-doubt. It stings.
Okay, so comparison is one piece. What else?
Another layer, which builds on ideas like Higgins's self-discrepancy theory, involves the gap between how we see ourselves now, our actual self, and who we want to be or feel we should be, our ideal or ought self.
The gap between reality and aspiration, basically.
Kind of, yeah. The sources show FOMO often thrives in that perceived gap. When you see someone online, say, achieving a goal you aspire to, or traveling somewhere you dream of, or just having this vibrant social life, it can painfully highlight where your actual self feels like it's falling short of your ideal self. That feeling of, oh, I'm falling behind or I'm not measuring up. That's a really core part of the distress in FOMO.
So it's not just wanting what they have, it's seeing their success as a sort of reflection of your own perceived failures or shortcomings.
Exactly. And then you connect that to something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Remember those fundamental needs, belongingness and esteem.
Sure, yeah, basic human needs.
Well, seeing others deeply connected, celebrated, included in things when you're not, that can feel like a direct threat to those needs. It can really undermine your sense of belonging to a group and even hit your own self-worth.
Okay, so we've got comparison, the self-perception gap, and these core needs for belonging and feeling valued. What else is driving FOMO formation?
This is where the brain science gets involved, and it's pretty interesting. The sources link FOMO directly to our brain's reward system, specifically dopamine.
Ah, the feel-good chemical.
Right. Think about notifications, likes, comments, new updates on social media. Each one can deliver this small, unpredictable burst of dopamine, a little reward signal.
Like tiny little positive reinforcement.
Exactly like that. And crucially, this operates on a principle from behavioral psychology linked to B.F. Skinner's work. It's called intermittent reinforcement.
Meaning it's unpredictable.
Yes. Because you don't know when the next, or interesting post will pop up, you're kind of compelled to keep checking constantly. This creates an addictive loop. It keeps you glued to your device,
Right.
which then makes you intensely vulnerable to feeling FOMO when you aren't checking or when you log on and see something you realize you missed out on. Your brain has basically been trained to seek out those unpredictable social rewards.
Wow, that explains that compulsive phone checking so well. You're chasing those little dopamine hits, and the fact that they're random makes it harder to stop.
It absolutely does. And one final point the sources often highlight is how FOMO can be particularly intense during adolescence.
Oh, interesting. Why then?
Well, it connects to Erik Erikson's stages of development, specifically the identity versus role confusion stage. Teenagers are actively trying to figure out who they are, where they fit in, what groups they belong to.
Yeah, a confusing time for sure.
Definitely. And so FOMO can strike really hard then because social experiences and getting that validation from peers feel absolutely critical to forming that identity. Missing out feels like missing a crucial piece of figuring yourself out and finding your place in the world.
So it's this potent mix then. Innate psychological needs, how we see ourselves versus others, our brain's reward circuitry, maybe developmental stages, and all of it gets amplified by this constant stream of curated online stuff.
It's a good summary, yeah.
It sounds
Yeah.
honestly exhausting. Which brings us nicely to the next part. Why is this actually harmful? What are the significant negative consequences the research identifies?
Yeah, the research is pretty clear on this. FOMO is strongly linked to increased negative mental health outcomes, particularly things like anxiety and depression.
Okay.
That constant exposure to what you perceive as better lives, combined with that feeling of being excluded or left behind, it just creates this breeding ground for chronic dissatisfaction, worry, lower mood.
I can absolutely see how that cycle would feed anxiety. Yeah.
It does. And it can also lead to something called decision fatigue.
Decision fatigue.
Yeah, because you're so worried about making the wrong choice, the choice that means you miss out on some potentially better alternative, you might struggle to commit to anything.
Oh, like spending ages trying to decide which party to go to or even just what to watch because you're scared something better is out there you're missing.
Exactly that, the paralysis of choice, but driven specifically by that fear of missing out. And this also contributes to a more general, pervasive sense of reduced life satisfaction. If you're always kind of looking over your shoulder mentally at what others are doing, your own experiences, even if they're objectively good or meaningful, can feel less fulfilling in comparison. It really feels that grass is always greener feeling, but maybe on steroids.
Right. And the sources also mention physical effects too, something about sleep.
Yes, definitely. It impacts sleep hygiene significantly, that compulsive checking we talked about. It's often driven by that fear of missing something important overnight or while you're offline.
So people are scrolling late at night?
Exactly. Late night device use disrupts sleep patterns, messes with your circadian rhythm, and that leads to a cycle of fatigue, which only makes it harder to cope with the anxiety and negative emotions during the day.
It all connects. And there was one more really important point about autonomy.
Yes, this draws on self-determination theory from Deci and Ryan. The sources highlight how FOMO can lead to a loss of autonomy.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
Well, self-determination theory suggests we thrive psychologically when we feel a sense of autonomy, like we have control over our own choices. Competence, feeling capable, and relatedness, feeling connected. when FOMO is driving your decisions.
Like going to that party you didn't really want to go to.
Exactly. Or buying something you don't need just because it's trendy. You're acting based on external pressure or the fear of not fitting in rather than your own genuine intrinsic values or desires. Your choices aren't really yours anymore. They're being dictated by fear, not by your internal compass.
Wow, that's quite profound, actually. FOMO isn't just about feeling a bit bad. It can literally hijack your decision-making and chip away at your sense of self.
It really can. But, and this is the powerful part, psychology doesn't just stop at diagnosing the problem. The sources also offer concrete strategies grounded in research to help reclaim that autonomy and, overcome FOMO.
Okay, good. That's the crucial bit. Let's dive into those solutions. Where do the sources suggest we start? What can people actually do?
Well, one major approach that comes up a lot is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Okay, CBT. How does that apply here?
The core idea for tackling FOMO with CBT is learning to identify and then challenge the specific, often irrational thoughts that fuel the fear.
Like that thought we mentioned earlier. Everyone is having an amazing time except me.
Exactly like that. CBT helps you catch that thought, recognize it for what it often is, maybe a cognitive distortion like overgeneralization or all or nothing thinking.
Right.
And the strategy then is to learn to consciously replace it with more balanced, realistic thinking. Actively reminding yourself, okay, social media is a highlight reel, not the full picture. Or everyone has mundane moments, bad days, boring evenings. I just don't see those posted. It's about actively restructuring that internal narrative around comparison.
Okay, so challenging the automatic negative thoughts makes sense. What about just being more present? Does that help?
Absolutely. That leads straight into another really powerful set of tools: mindfulness and acceptance-based practices. Things like MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, or ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy.
How do they counter FOMO?
Well, think about it. FOMO constantly pulls your mind into an anxious future. What if I miss out? Or maybe a regretful past. I should have gone to that thing. Mindfulness practices train you to ground yourself firmly in the present moment.
Which is sort of the opposite of where FOMO lives, mentally speaking.
Exactly. The key nugget here is developing non-judgmental awareness, learning to just observe those feelings, the anxiety, the envy, the restlessness, without getting totally swept away by them.
Yeah.
And the acceptance part is about allowing those uncomfortable emotions to just be there, without necessarily liking them, but also without letting them dictate your actions.
You feel the FOMO, but you don't automatically react based on it.
Precisely. Instead, you learn to make choices based on your deeply held values, what truly matters to you, even if that sometimes means consciously choosing to miss out on what others are doing. It's about choosing meaning over fear right now.
Shifting from being reactive and fear-driven to being more intentional and values-driven. I like that. And gratitude came up in the sources too, right?
Yes,
That one.
definitely. Positive psychology research consistently shows that fostering gratitude is a really potent countermeasure to the constant comparison and envy that fuel FOMO.
How does that work, practically?
The strategies can be super simple but effective, like regularly taking a moment to reflect on what you do have in your life, what you have experienced that was meaningful, or even just small things you're grateful for right now in this moment.
Like keeping a gratitude journal, that kind of
That's
stuff.
the classic example,
Yeah.
yeah. Or just taking a mindful minute each day to notice something good. The key psychological mechanism is that gratitude actively redirects your attention. It shifts your focus away from what you perceive as missing elsewhere and puts it squarely onto the value, the richness, the good stuff that's already present in your own life. It builds that internal sense of contentment, which is a great antidote to FOMO.
Okay. And of course, we have to address the social media elephant in the room directly. What about managing that?
Absolutely crucial. Digital boundaries and media literacy are key strategies the sources emphasize. It's really about becoming a more intentional and, frankly, more critical consumer of online content.
So practical things like limiting screen time.
Yes, setting realistic screen time limits. Maybe consciously choosing not to check devices during certain hours, like first thing in the morning or before bed. And being mindful of why you're picking up the phone. Is it intentional or just habit-driven by that fear?
Maybe unfollowing accounts that consistently make you feel inadequate.
That's a great example, yeah. Curating your feed for your well-being. And practicing media literacy means actively questioning those perfect images and stories you see. Reminding yourself consciously that what's presented online is often a performance, a carefully selected snapshot, not the messy, complex reality of anyone's life. It's about building a psychological buffer against the triggers.
Okay. And finally, you mentioned circling back to that idea of autonomy and self-determination theory. How does that fit into overcoming FOMO?
Yeah, the sources strongly suggest that a powerful long-term strategy is to focus on strengthening your internal motivation, reconnecting with those core needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness in healthier ways.
How do you do that?
Well, build your sense of autonomy by making choices based on your own genuine interests and values, not just what you think you should do or what looks good online. Foster competence by setting and working towards personal goals that matter to you, things that give you a sense of accomplishment separate from external validation or comparison. And cultivate authentic relatedness, that sense of connection, by investing time and energy in deep, meaningful relationships offline. Shared activities, real conversations, things that align with your values, rather than just chasing likes or follower counts online.
That feels like the ultimate aim, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Really shifting the focus from that external chase, driven by fear, towards building internal fulfillment, driven by your own sense of purpose.
It really is. It represents a fundamental shift from anxiously observing other people's lives to actively engaging in and building a life that feels meaningful and rewarding on your terms.
Okay, so just to kind of wrap this up, FOMO, it's clear it's deeply embedded in our psychology, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tied to how we compare ourselves, how we see ourselves, those basic needs for belonging, even our brain's reward system.
Definitely.
And yeah, the digital age has absolutely amplified it, and it can lead to real distress, anxiety, low satisfaction, even losing touch with our own choices.
True. But the really powerful takeaway from all the sources, I think, is that understanding these psychological mechanisms gives us a kind of map. We see how it works. And then applying these psychological strategies we've talked about, challenging thoughts, practicing mindfulness and presence, cultivating gratitude, setting digital boundaries, building that internal motivation, those give us the tools to navigate it.
So FOMO is maybe more like a signal then, a signal that perhaps something's out of balance, rather than some kind of life sentence you just have to endure.
That's a great way to put it. Exactly. It's a signal. And with awareness and some conscious effort using these strategies, you absolutely can shift from being controlled by that fear of missing out to finding more presence, more joy, more meaning in the life you are actually living and actively building.
That feels like a really hopeful and empowering place to end. Okay, so maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Considering that idea we just discussed about shifting from fear-based decisions driven by FOMO towards more values-based living, what's maybe one small concrete step you could take, say this week, to spend a little less time observing others' lives online and a bit more time actively engaging in something that feels genuinely meaningful to you?